All right, so what I will now do, perhaps, is I will go onto Moodle to start off with, just to show you what we've actually got on there. Okay, so as I said before, what we are going to be designing this semester is an ambulance station. So this is going to be a multifaceted sort of process as you study what an ambulance station is. Now, the first thing I would say is that we are going to go and visit an ambulance station next week. And I have actually, was it an announcement that I made, or was it, no, it wasn't. It was, I think I've got it down here. So let's see. So what's going to happen next week, Tuesday the 12th of September, is that we're going to visit the Aranda Fire and Ambulance Station in Bindubi Street, just near Belconnen Way. So what this is that it's across the road from the Canberra High School. Okay, so because of the size of our group, we'll have to do it in 3 different groups. So what we'll do is we'll meet in the car park. If you're facing the Aranda Fire and Ambulance Station, we'll meet in the car park on the right. And I think that's a public car park, so you can actually put your cars there for the duration of it. But I think it would be better to have less cars rather than more. So perhaps all of you could organize to meet here, and then for 5 people to go in 1 car, and so on and so forth. Okay. So what will happen is we will start at 10 a.m. So Jack and Swati's groups will be the first to go through together to have a look at the fire and ambulance station. And then at 10:30, Robert and Erin's groups will be taken on the tour through there. And at 11 o'clock, my group will go through. And then we will all reconvene back here, where I will give a lecture about ambulance and fire stations. All right. So the main thing to remember here is that you need to try and figure out how these things work. I think in terms of ambulances and fire stations, I will go into it more next week, but they are very similar in the way that they work. The only difference between the two is that fire engines are bigger than ambulances, so the space for the vehicles are going to be bigger in a fire station when compared to an ambulance station. And the other thing that's different is that the cleaning after jobs is going to be easier with an ambulance station than with a fire station, because obviously ambulances don't have big hoses to be putting out fires where they need to sort of have water going through and so on and so forth. So in fire stations, all those things, you need the big drying towels and what have you. In ambulance stations, you don't. So where they are the same is that they need a space, a service space for the parking and the maintenance of the machines. They need an admin space, which is the office of the station, and then they also need a living space, because as you probably know, all of these ambulance and fire stations are manned 24 hours a day. So basically, during the time when they're not being called out, they may need places to rest, and they'll need to stay there for the duration of their shift. So it's a unique type in the sense that it is somewhere where someone works and lives in the same place for during their shift. Okay, so that's what we'll do next week. But before then, I'd like to draw your attention to assignment 2, which is here. So I will load this up on the on the Moodle soon. But assignment 2 will have 2 parts. The first part of assignment 2 will be the functional brief analysis, and the second part of it will be the site analysis. Okay, so what we will do for the next week is we will concentrate on the functional brief analysis, and then after that we'll get into the site analysis. So we'll try and organize for I will tell you where the site is, and you can go and visit it, and then we'll try and organize for a site visit as a group as well the week after. Okay, so the site, so part 1 of assignment 2, there's basically 2 parts there. The first thing I want you guys to do is to develop a return brief to the functional brief that I'll be giving you. And the second thing I want you to do is to research a case study, emergency services building that you have selected or you have been assigned. So this is basically the big list that went out before. For you to fill in your names next to a building. Did you all do that? Did you all do that? Yes. Okay, well that's good. So if you haven't done that, go and see your tutor and write it down. And also don't forget to write down the name of the building that you're going to be studying, because of course you need to be studying it, right? So there's two. This part is really about trying to figure out how other emergency services buildings work. Now, from that list, there were buildings in Canberra, buildings in other states in Australia, buildings overseas. There were contemporary buildings, and there were historical buildings. There were ambulance stations, there were fire stations, and there were ambulance and fire stations. Okay, some of the buildings had other functions in them as well. But the main thing to do is to try and figure out how these buildings relate back to the brief, the functional brief that I'll give you. Okay, and so this should all be done graphically, and I will put out a more detailed sort of requirement of what we need in terms of the graphic outputs. But it will be an A3. It will be an A3 assignment. Okay. Now on to the return brief. So with point 1 there, developing a return brief, what it is basically to take the functional brief and to expand on it to see how big it is in terms of areas and volumes by drawing boxes of that area to scale and heights as well. And basically to be working out a bit more as to the relationships between all the different spaces. Okay, so I will go there now. So what we have here, which I will also load up after the lecture, is the functional brief. So what you can see from the functional brief is basically 3 different areas here. So we start with the service areas, which is all the 1s. The 2s is the administration spaces, and then the 3s are the living spaces. Okay, so more importantly would be this diagram here. So what this diagram here gives you is the relationships between all the different spaces, or between the different groups of spaces. What needs access to the outside, and what needs private access, two different kinds of circulation. Okay, so this relates directly to the assignment you've just done in terms of trying to abstract and figure out what different kinds of circulations for public buildings are. So essentially, we've got those 3 things represented here in 3 colors. If you can imagine, the street will be here, and this is where the ambulances will sit, and this is when they get called out. What happens is that this is where they will exit. Okay, this area is also where they work on the ambulances and what have you. And then over here you've got the administrative spaces. So what they are is basically the offices, and when they send people out, where they have their training rooms, where members of the public come in to talk about things with the ambulance people, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then finally the third thing is the living areas, right? And then there's this is basically where they can rest, they can cook, they can just hang out, and so on and so forth. Essentially, this is their dwelling while they are on duty. Okay, so what happens is when a call comes through from the dispatcher, which is a centralized dispatch, not in the ambulance station. they will run out of the living areas through this response tunnel into the service areas, and then they will drive their ambulances with a lot of speed and noise to where they're required to be. Now, once they have finished their job, if you like, they will come back to the ambulance station, and they will drive in the back and basically come in through the back of the garage there. Now, there's two things that you need to know there. The first thing is that when they attend to emergencies, what they will do is they will try to deal with those emergencies on the spot. If they can't deal with it on the spot, they will put the patient into the ambulance and drive them to a hospital. They'll drop them off at the hospital, after which they will come back to the ambulance station. So the whole idea of the ambulance station is that there are many ambulance stations spread over the city, so that there's a faster response from to certain areas from the ambulance station. So you can imagine if all the ambulances just lived in the main Canberra hospital in Woden, then they had to drive to Fyshwick, then of course the response time would be slower because they've got further to go. So the whole aim of this ambulance station is to provide a more dispersed distribution or network of ambulance stations, and similarly with fire stations, right? So the practice in the ACT right now is to group the ambulance stations and the fire stations together. Now, our problem as tutors of Design 2.2 is that if we get you to do the fire station and the ambulance station, it's going to be too much, okay? It's going to be too big a building. So I've chosen just to split it into ambulance station, which will be more handleable for people of your level. Just a side note about the Aranda ambulance and fire station that we'll be going to see next week. I'd like to thank Jack for organizing the trip, organizing the visit to the ambulance and fire station. And the reason why Jack has a relationship with them is because Guyder Moseley Brown, the firm that Jack works for, was the architect for the Aranda ambulance and fire station. So don't say anything too mean about it in front of him, if you don't mind. Okay, so moving right along, if we go back to this to the functional brief here, what you will notice is that in section 1, which are all of these ones, there are a series of functions, okay? So that's where you need to, that's where your return brief comes in. First of all, you need to see what all of these mean. Some of them just say you have to design it to make sure that it works. Some of them give you spaces for amps. So in this case, we have we need 3 spaces for the ambulances, and each of the ambulance spaces should be that big. Storerooms are this big, etc., etc. Okay, so that's one group. So in your return brief, you basically need to see how big all of these things are and how they sit next to each other. And then similarly with the admin spaces, you've got a whole stack of different spaces in here. Now the diagram I showed you before is not to scale, okay? So what you end up with here is going to look quite different to that diagram. And that's the difference between basically a bubble diagram, which is what I showed you before, and a response brief. Again, the living areas with here, you can see that you've got things which are just like a house. You've got a lounge, you've got your kitchen dining, you've got your bedrooms, and then you've got your toilets and your showers, and then you've got a private garden. Okay, so those are all the provisions. Now, the thing here is that the 3 of them need to be related to each other. So what you need to do is you need to take this diagram and use these relationships to develop the return brief. So the return brief takes all those numbers and figures out what the relations are, between the rooms, and also how big they are. Okay, kind of like this on a bigger scale and 2 scale. So if I might just show you a relationship diagram, what we've then got here will be something like this. Okay, so you can see that What this is more of a bubble diagram. It's very similar to what I showed to you, but it actually shows what needs to be next to each other, right? So it's actually a proximity diagram about how things should relate to each other. So obviously, you can see here that the bedrooms need to relate to the outdoors. So does the living, kitchen, and dining. So do the other bedrooms, and all these other functions don't really need to do so. Another example would be really to just choose the central things and to choose the things which are actually linked to it. This one is actually about words, not spaces, but you get the idea of working out what the hub is and so on. And then let's see, I think it was this one. So this again is another sort of a development of that kind of idea of working out all the relationships. And I think there's one final one, which is something like this, where basically you start to draw everything as 3D boxes just to see how big they are, and then you can put them together. Okay. So as a point of sequence, I think what you should do. I think the first thing you should do is to figure out how all the spaces relate to each other without worrying about how big they need to be. That will be step one. Step two will be then to actually make those spaces into the actual areas and volumes that they are. So the floor area as well as the height required for each of those things, right? And then you will then have a group of all these boxes which have all these lines as to where they need to go to each other. Okay, and from that, then you will start to understand how these things all need to relate to each other, and how big things need to be, how small things need to be, fronts and backs, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is really quite directly related to the most recent exercise that you've done, being about circulation of public buildings. Don't forget that as an ambulance station, you have the public side, which is where people off the street can come to the office, or visitors and what have you. And then you have the private side, which is where the ambulances are kept in the living spaces. So the private side, has two aspects to it as well. Yeah, so that's something that you need to take into account. So once you've got an idea about how these things work, what I then want you to do is to go and look closely at your case study building and see how that case study building relates to the return brief that you have designed. Okay? And based on the two, you may want to, what I want you guys to do is to actually comment as to how the case study building is the same and how it is different. With the case study building, some of them are 2-story buildings, some of them are 3-story buildings, some of them are very large, some of them very small, some of them only have ambulances, some of them only fire, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the whole point of the case study building is to study an existing model in terms of what our functional brief and our return brief in. I will draw your attention to the case study buildings as well. The thing with the case study buildings is that they are some are in Canberra, some are in other parts of Australia, some are overseas. Okay, some are new and some are old. So all of those things need to come into account. You need to take into account the cultural context and the historical context. So the obvious one would be like horse and carts are going to be smaller than fire engines. Therefore, the doors were smaller. They had less mechanization in those days. They were more interested in making these things look like certain things, whereas now we have different sorts of technology and different sorts of construction and so on and so forth. Okay, so any questions on this front? Yeah, so this is what you guys should be doing between now and next Friday. What you guys should do is basically you need to be working out a whole stack of diagrams and drawings and analytical things. And we will go through into more detail as to how this can be, how you can develop that in the lecture next week. But if you want to come and talk to me on Friday afternoon to show me what you've got, to get a bit of feedback and to see how you can improve that, I'm happy to see you. As with always, please send me an email and make an appointment to see me. And don't forget that if I don't get back to you within the day, please remind me that you want to see me, because I may have missed your email. Now, Kerry's got a question over there.
In that first part of the brief, you say that it has to be inclusive of 1 into 1B. Do you mean the 1B that we just done, or the 1B?
Sorry, I mean 2B. I mean 1B in here. So part 1B. Yeah. So this is for assignment 2.
So assignment 2, part 1B.
Yes.
Analyze 2 diagrams, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, so sorry, 1B does not relate to the exercise from 2 weeks ago. So basically what you need to do is to analyze in graphic forms the areas and volumes, analyze through diagrams the relationships between the space, which of course 1A and 1B are related. And then 2 is to look at that through the case study. Okay, now I will just introduce assignment 2 part 2 now, but we will go into it in more detail in probably next week. All right, so basically next week's lecture is where I'll be giving you some examples as to the analytical tools, diagrams, and drawings and models that you can use to conceptually analyze and interpret the site in particular also. And also during the week, I'll load up site information as to where it is and so on and so forth. So as assignment 2 part 1 was related to the circulation and therefore to use, assignment 2 part 2 is really to look into the site as a non-urban site or a nearly urban site, and the characteristics within then. So you need to bring to that form of analysis your models from 1B, and then of course we need to do analysis as to the flora of the site and surrounds. So that relates back to 1A, to the conceptual model 1A, right? And then of course we will be doing other analysis in terms of vehicular pedestrian circulation of the site, relates to conceptual model 1C, and then other things like the climate of the site and surrounds. The site is in Canberra, by the way, next to Epic off the Federal Highway. And then also be looking at the existing buildings and the sites and surrounds and what have you. And of course, because we are in Canberra, we'd be interested in the geometry of the city, and if any geometry of the city actually affects our site. Okay, so in terms of the climatic conditions of the sites and surrounds, this is all the kinds of things that you're actually looking at in sustainable environmental techniques with Milica, which most of you are currently doing. Okay, so are there any questions on any of this stuff? No questions? So look, there's a lot to take in. I will load this stuff on the Moodle. And if you have any questions, please make an appointment oh, there's a question. There's 2 questions. Okay, yes, thank you for that. Yes, no, I've ditched the group assignment. I've made an executive decision and ditched the group assignment because I couldn't figure out how to do it successfully. Okay, for assignment 2. If there is going to be one, it will be a small one, and we'll consider it in assignment 3.
So I just wanted to clarify before we're actually submitting, with the progress for next week, you want us to still really flesh out the functional group, and then actually next week we'll be submitting that analysis, but in actual diagrams.
Yes. Thank you, Sika. So what's going to happen next week is that we're not going to have a huge amount of time because of the site visit. So before the site visit and after the site visit, we'll basically meet up here, and you can, if you have material, then you can bring it and show it to your tutors. We can look at it then. But I imagine with all the driving around, there may not be a lot of time. So in which case, what you should do is either have stuff that you're ready to show, or come and see me on this Friday, or come and see me on the next Friday before the following Tuesday's full tutorial. So really, in 2 weeks from now, what we want is we want quite a lot of work. Doesn't need to be correct, but we want quite a lot of explorations. So we can, for you to show us, so we can then sort of suggest what's working and what's not working, and where to go from there. Okay, but really, between this Friday, between now and next Tuesday, is really a lot about trying to gather everything that we know, not only about our particular project, but also about the type of the emergency services building. There's a question here.
Does any of this involve making a model, or is it all just?
I encourage model making. So if models are if you do make models because you've gotten into the practice of making models, so models might be a really good way of doing this. And because the hand-in is in week 8, it's now week 5. The hand-in is in week 8, and the hand-in is only a PDF on Moodle. There's no presentation. So what you guys will need to do is to photograph your models to explain to us in your hand-in what it is that you've done. Okay, so the weeks are slightly screwed up, but because we essentially only have one full tute and one half tute, you guys will have to be working fast to get everything out there so that we can help you progress the thing. So half tute next Tuesday because of the site visit, and then full tute the Tuesday following, and then office hours with me on the Friday. Any other questions? Yes.
In the first part where we have to do the ambulance bays, do they have to be like side by side so all of them can get out at once?
Yes, the question is, do the ambulance bays need to be all together? Yes. What we have to presume is that with the 3 ambulances, any of them can be called out at any time. So the way that it generally works with these things is that they have individual bays, so that if one needs work, they can just work on it in their bay, and it doesn't affect the use of the other 2 bays. Any questions, comments? All done, all finished? All right, thanks everyone, and we'll see you Friday or Tuesday.